Hey everyone. Okay, so today we're going to talk about literary terms that I want you to know. So I'm going to write down those journalist questions that we are all familiar with, right? That is your who, what, where, when, why, and how. Okay? All right, so here are all the questions that we're going to talk about when you're analyzing your literature. As we move forward in this discussion, we're going to identify each of these things in a story and how you can then use it to talk about your story. So the who in a story is pretty easy. Everybody's familiar with characters, right? So your who in your story are your characters. And your characters can be either static or dynamic. And if they are static, that means that they don't change. If they are dynamic, they change throughout the course of the story. So there are your static and dynamic characters. Your where and your when is your setting. This is something that you all have heard of as well. Okay? And setting plays an important role in many stories. We're going to talk a little bit about the yellow wallpaper soon. The yellow wallpaper is classic Gothic literature. And in a Gothic story, the setting is paramount. A setting in a Gothic story is often something like your old haunted house, an ancient mansion, usually abandoned, lots of vines growing up the sides, sort of crumbling. That's your setting, and it adds really to your ghost story element of your Gothic literature. So setting can be really important. In some stories, like A Rose for Emily, setting almost becomes its own character, which we'll talk about when I do the Rose for Emily video. This small town in A Rose for Emily is almost like a character in and of itself. So setting is the where and the when of how the story takes place. Then, almost most important for understanding your story is your what. And your what is your plot. And that's just what happens in the story. It's hard to understand the story and to dig deep into a story if you can't even identify what the plot is, what actually happened. That said, plot is the thing that you're going to write about the least. A lot of times, students, when they give papers, one of the traps that they will fall into is falling into plot summary instead of analysis. Plot summary just means recapping the story to me. I don't want you, when you're writing your papers, I don't want you to recap your story. I know what happened. What I want you to do is to use those plot moments to help to analyze your story by identifying all of these other pieces. The why is what you are going to find out. Okay, so when you are writing your story, when you are analyzing your stories, this is what you're looking for. You're looking for what's the point. Avoid trying to look for that sort of catchy moral that can be summed up in you should always be nice to your friends. Okay, life is not that simple, and literature is not that simple, and oftentimes writers aren't writing with something as simple as that moral or message in mind. So what you're trying to figure out is, why would the author incorporate all of these literary elements into the story to try and make you feel a certain way? Why does the author want you to feel a certain way? What is the purpose of drawing out these emotions? What's the point? And the how, that's how the author uses the literary terms. So that is exactly what we are talking about today. How does the author use these literary terms to identify for you who the different characters are, what the setting is, what happens in the story, in order to help you get to that, what's the point? Why would you be reading this story? What is the author's goal in having you read this story? There are more literary terms that we're going to talk about in another video, but for now, just be sure that for all the stories that you're reading, you can identify the characters, the dynamic characters, and the static characters, the setting, the where and when of the story, and the plot, what is actually happening. All right? Happy reading.